This is my favorite thing to do all year, and it is, and because I love talking to first-year students, and this is my only opportunity, really, maybe my first opportunity. Maybe I'll come back and talk to you about visual media, but I always get a lot of energy. I leave this lecture with a lot of energy, and it propels me through the next year. And last year I did a presentation that was sort of like a book in formation, and that book is finally finished, and maybe this one will turn into something similar. So you guys are the first ones to hear. I am the James E. McGee Professor. So I'm a professor with another name attached, which is kind of interesting, and you might say, what does that mean? Well, what it means is that many, many years ago, many decades ago, in the late 1960s, the photographic industry, the consumer side of the photographic industry, created a professorship, and the idea was to have somebody attend to photography used by everyone. In other words, consumer imaging. It was Kodak, and it was all the companies like Kodak that put this professorship together. And so my focus, one of the hats that I wear is as the James E. McGee Professor. I look at photography as it is used by everyone, not limited to artists or people in advertising or people in the professional world, but consumers. And so that flavors a lot of my thinking. It flavors a lot of my scholarship, and you're going to see that reflected today in this presentation. So let me just show you a couple of pictures to start with. That is actually not my first camera, but it's exactly the model of the first camera I had, a Starmite 2. This was given to me in the early 1960s by an uncle, and it was my entry into the world of photography. I always compared my camera to my father's camera, which was a Kodak Pony. I always thought his was streamlined and sleek, and mine was kind of boxy and ugly, and I wanted his camera. I sort of coveted his camera. In fact, here's a picture of me coveting my father's camera. I'm the oldest one there, and you can see I'm clutching the camera case. I'm looking at him taking a picture of the three of us, and I remember what I was thinking. I want that camera. Well, my little brother Jim, who is on your right, got the camera, and I harbored a bitter resentment for many, many years. I'm just joking, but I could have harbored a bitter resentment, but then eBay came along and saved our relationship. You'll notice with 11 seconds left on this auction, that camera is still priced at $2.99. The reason why is because they made a lot of those cameras, okay? I grew up in the 1960s with a dark room. My dad built us a dark room. It was kind of very primitive, but it was, I saw this magic for the first time. How many of you got hooked on photography when you saw that for the first time? Yeah, it's just so interesting how that just grabs you, and that grabbed me, and I loved it, and I started doing it, and really it's been a lifetime. And so today I'm standing here after maybe 50 years of playing with photography and working with photography, and the story I'm going to tell you is the result of all of those decades. My first photo job was working for our local newspaper. It was called the Camillus Advocate. I got a lot of photographs published in that paper, and I also worked on ads. Look at this ad here. The Piro Brothers Ford dealership. I remember going and taking those pictures, and I had to learn how to dodge because they both had really heavy 5 o'clock shadows, so they look like used car salesman, you know, and I actually did the ad design too, which sort of makes me confused. Should I have been an advertising student or an editorial, photojournalism, design? What's my discipline? I've always kind of lived in the spaces between the disciplines, and I have to confess, the reason why I had that job was because of nepotism. My mother was the editor of the newspaper. So don't discount the advantages of those kind of things in your life. Now, when I came to RIT, it was a very different place from what it is today. The School of Photography, here's an advertisement from the late 1970s, which is just shortly before I started here. And it was done for Super Chromega, and they were all, you can see they're all out in the quad there with all these enlargers. The company had donated all these enlargers, and they wanted to run an advertisement. This was in Modern Photography magazine. And if you look through there are about 157 students, I think. I counted them once. And if you carefully go through this picture, which, by the way, if you send me an email, I'll send this picture to anybody who wants to look at it. You will count exactly, I think, 13 women, and the rest were men. So the balance of this school back then was heavily male-dominated, sort of like software engineering today. Now, we've changed a lot. This is, I think some of you are probably in that picture. I went and checked in the office, and the ratio now of our incoming class, about 60-40 female to male. So quite a different place. Back when I started here, I actually have a friend of mine, Patty Ambrosi, I think was one of the first women on the faculty, right? And you were shortly thereafter.
I think I was second.
So Angela was second, and they will tell you all kinds of stories about what life was like here back in those days, because it was a boys' club. And so in the late 80s, early 90s, they started to get worried. There was a whole huge legal thing about sexual harassment, you know. And so we all had to go to seminars and mandatory seminars to learn how to behave with women. And I went to these seminars, and most of what I heard made common sense. You know, I was raised in a family where women were, there was no issue there. But a few things I heard really kind of scared me a little bit. And one of the things I remember is one of the consultants who ran this seminar said that she gave an example of you could get on an elevator, and if you were a man, and you could, by the way you looked at a woman who got on the elevator, you could actually be harassing that person. In other words, by the way you kind of glanced or looked or whatever. And I got a little bit scared because my whole life I've been looking at stuff, right? And it's the first time I ever heard you could get in trouble for looking at something, at someone. And so this sort of led to a lot of pondering. Because my interest in looking, I did a little timeline here. Not interested in these things and extremely fascinated by those things. And you can see that the things I'm most fascinated to look at are the things that could be most dangerous to look at. And I am a person who wants to avoid litigation at all cost. And so, what am I going to do? I've got a problem. And there are ways to look too, right? It's okay not to look. It's not okay to be a peeping Tom, but there are all these things in between. And I started hearing this term gaze, the male gaze. What does that mean? Well, and where does that go? Right there, maybe? We've had a discussion about this as I've been preparing this thing. I don't know. We can talk about this. And so, and then there's this long history of men making creepy pictures of women and calling it art. So I thought I'd just review Charles Dodgson and Alice Little. You know who they are? Anybody? Charles Dodgson? Well, he's the guy who wrote Alice in Wonderland. Lewis Carroll. And Alice was a real girl. And Dodson was, there's been a lot written about him. I will refer you to the literature. Go read about it, because there's a lot of controversy about, was he, what kind of, he was taking pictures of, this is a modern remake of Alice in Wonderland. Notice how Disney has changed. There's Alice when I was a kid. There's Alice for you guys. I mean, she almost looks like she's got a heroin problem. And the Johnny Depp, my God, he's ready for the grave. And I sort of see these as Charles and Alice in reality, maybe. Alfred Stieglitz and Georgia O'Keeffe. I'm going to let you guys go and learn about these things, but there's a lot of really, in my opinion, sort of creepy pictures of Georgia O'Keeffe. There's some beautiful pictures too, but he had this fixation on breasts, and he used to, have people pose, and Georgia was one of the people he photographed a lot. There's this guy, Miroslav Tiki. He was just just feted by the art world and has become very, very famous. He's dead now, but his photographs are trading for incredible amounts of money. And he made this homemade camera and crept around in his village in Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic, taking pictures through fences and stuff like that. He was considered to be a sort of like the old guy who takes pictures with his fake camera. Everybody thought he was not taking pictures, because how could you possibly take a picture with a camera like that? My favorite quote of his: "If you want to be famous, you must do something more badly than anybody in the entire world." And then there's this guy, Terry Richardson. I didn't even include any of his pictures because he's creepy enough. And I'll let you look him up. And then Bruce Gilden, again, very famous guy. He likes to ambush people in the street. He's a New Yorker. He jumps up and flashes them and gets these really, really, some of the pictures are so unbelievably horrible that, but anyway, and I really, that's in the background. I really never had an interest in doing this type of work. And so I kind of early on started to realize, there are subjects that are okay for me to photograph, especially in that area of fascination, right? And they come down to this, grandmother, I had 2 of them. Mother, I had 1 of them. I had 1 sister. I have 1 wife. I have 1 daughter. I thought of adding an aunts and nieces, but my aunts never really interested me that much. And I've taken a couple of pictures of my nieces, but again, this was my set of completely okay to gaze, okay to photograph, right? And so a lot of the work that I've done, my personal work, has been of these people. Now, the best way to avoid a lawsuit, anybody, when you're photographing? Yes?
Don't get caught.
Well, yeah, don't get caught. It's a selfie, all right? That's why selfies are so popular, because nobody's going to arrest you for you're not going to sue yourself. And I have played with selfies a lot. This is a book I did. In fact, I brought the books that I'm showing you today. This one is called Facing Myself, and I went all over the world with this book, giving lectures, and had some people, interesting experiences, having people like in India scratching their head, or China, when I did this presentation or showed this book. I did a version, Facing Myself Extreme. Again, no threat of lawsuit. My intent was to do Facing Myself Light, but I never got around to it. But I think maybe I will do that sometime, and that will sort of be the triptych of those 3 books. Now, seriously, I want to just mention Roland Barthes. All of you, if you want to really be in the intellectual world of photography, you're going to have to read this book. And it's going to drive you crazy because it's the last book he wrote. He wrote it at the end of his life. He was a literary critic. He was one of the founders of something called semiology. He was considered to be one of the leaders of the postmodern kind of movement that looked at language and said language can be used in so many ways, and you can interpret the world through language in so many ways. In this notion of truth being something that was subjective. But at the end of his life, toward the end of his life, he wrote this book, and it was after his mother died. He had lived with his mother for his whole life. And it was a book, essentially, that was written by a person who'd lived with his mother, was mourning his mother's loss, and had discovered a photograph of his mother that he says gave him all the information and pierced him in a very, very poignant way. And he talked about this. It was called the Winter Garden Photograph, and the Winter Garden Photograph is the only photograph he talks about in the book that he doesn't show you. He says it wouldn't mean anything to you. It means everything to me, but it wouldn't mean anything to you. And I always felt like, you stingy little guy, you know? I mean, I want to see that picture. Why can't you show me that picture? A lot of people have said there is no Winter Garden picture, that it was just a fiction. It was a fiction, that he created this fiction. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about Roland Barthes here, but I will tell you that if I were you sitting there right now, I would put this on my list, and I would say, that's a book that by the time I graduate here, I need to understand what's in that book. I need to be able to have an intelligent conversation, because you could teach a whole course about that book alone. And so I commend it to you. So I inherited the family archive, and I've always been interested in looking at family pictures and looking for, this elusive Winter Garden photograph. Do I believe in the Winter Garden photograph? I actually don't believe in the Winter Garden photograph, because I believe that with a proper text around it, photographs that are personal to me can speak to you in a powerful way. And you can tell me whether or not you believe me or agree with me after we're finished today. I found pictures of my father's mother, who was an amazing person. I won't tell you anything more than that she was an amazing person. She was a Greek. My family was all of my grandparents were from that part of the world originally. This is my favorite picture of her. She was always smoking. I was a secondhand smoker from the time I was born until I got out of my house, basically. And it did not hurt me at all, I don't think, unless you think there's something wrong up here. There's a picture of my mother's mother, and she's wearing this dead fox. And my mother, on a graduation day, I think she graduated from maybe high school or college or something like that. I don't know exactly what the date is on that one. Here's my mom posing as a movie star. And there's a lot of pictures. I found a lot of pictures of my mother. All of them, of course, mean something to me. There's my mother and my father's mother together, and there's this hint of reality on my mother's face, which otherwise is not there. These are all pictures of my mother, some of which I took and some of which I found in the family archive. And you'll notice it's exactly the same face in every one of those pictures. She's got a little bit of upper teeth showing. She's got that kind of faint smile. That's what my mother looks like when she's being photographed, right? And it's very frustrating, because I want to see the real person, and this is not the real person. Although I love these pictures, they don't do much for me. They're not Winter Garden pictures. There's my sister, my grandmother, and my mother, all with the same smile on their face, right? I took that picture in the sun, back when I didn't understand how lighting worked. There's a picture I took of my mother. I ambushed her in the supermarket one day. This was when I was working for her in the newspaper, and I actually got that a little bit of the real person shining through because she didn't put on that face. And so I've always wanted to take pictures of my mother, but she wasn't a good photographic subject. She has turned into one of my best photographic subjects. And the way I broke through that barrier was to create, I discovered when I was FaceTiming with my mother or Skyping with my mother, she didn't know that I could take a picture of her. And so I started to be able to photograph her without her knowing it. And it was like the gift from God, right? I just started to collect photographs, and all of them were the real person, not the fake posed person. And so when I got to a certain point, I had enough to make a book, and that book was called What Mom Actually Looks Like, FaceTime Portraits of an Elusive Subject. And when I showed my mother this book, there was something happened. All of a sudden, she started to realize that and there's an essay in there about why this was an important moment for me, but why do I need her to relax and just be herself when the camera comes out? Very difficult. And but she actually went through a transformation. And that transformation started with, I found this picture in a box in our basement about 10 years ago. It was made by, my mom worked for Time magazine, and it was made by one of her friends who was a photographer named John Zimmerman. And they worked in the same area, and he did this little triptych. And it's got some kind of suggestive caption on the bottom there, but actually they were just friends. My mom said they were just good friends. Zimmerman went on to become a rather famous photographer. He had 107 Sports Illustrated covers in his life. He was one of the pioneers of flash photography in sports. He photographed the Beatles. Just incredible career. But this was when they were both in their early 20s, so just a little bit older than you guys are. Well, my mom called me. I found this picture, and I actually cherish this picture. It's actually in a frame, beautifully mounted now. But last year, my mom called me and said, guess what? I found this envelope, and there are contact sheets in there, and I think they're from that day that we were at the thing, and John Zimmerman, those pictures. Do you want them, or should I throw them away? I said, I'll be there immediately. And sure enough, they were the contact sheets from that day. And it's like one of the greatest gifts I've ever received was those contact sheets. Because when I looked at them, there were all these pictures. It turns out there were pictures by John Zimmerman on the same roll of film. Pictures by John Zimmerman, pictures by another guy named Bob Phillips, who became another famous life photographer, and 2 frames taken by my mother. So what a perfect thing. Contact sheet with those 3 people. And this is John Zimmerman. I've since gotten to know his daughter through the book that I did that came out of this. There's my mom, a picture I had never seen from the contact sheet. There's another picture from the contact sheet. And so I had this idea. I wonder if she would agree to assume the same poses at the age of 89 as she had done at the age of 23. And she said yes. And so I got in the car immediately, drove to Syracuse, and where they live, and she was cooperative, and she sat there and she put on the same pose. Even with props. The only thing she couldn't do very well, she couldn't really look like delighted, like wow, that, because she just, she's gotten to an age where that's, well, actually, that looks like it, but this is the pout. She couldn't pout. And then I realized, old folks, like, I can't pout because I have no reason. It's not a tool that I can use to get anything, right? And she's forgotten how to pout. But it's something that all children can do almost from the time they're born. I mean, a six-month-old child can pout. And that became a book called Contact Prints, which you can take a look at up here, about that story. There's my daughter Elaine pouting at the age of maybe, I don't know, maybe 2 years old. My wife Patty and I have always loved the little furrowed eyebrow on. All of our kids had that, but Elaine really knows how to put it on. And there she is. She was an RIT student. There's an eyebrow again. And these pictures are taken after I regained permission to take her picture, because there's that dark period in the teenage years where it's just no pictures. So these were all from before or after that period. And during that period, how was I going to photograph my daughter? Because I am just a compulsive photographer. I must be photographing. And so one day I looked in her bedroom and realized she was gone. She had gone to the mall or something. She's 14 years old. And I realized I could photograph my daughter without her actually being there by just invading her room. And I did a book called Lane's Room, which, again, I took it on lectures all over the place, and it just made a big hit. I did a series of programs for Xerox. And Elaine's Room, I still see people from Xerox and HP, and they'll come up to me and go, "How's Elaine doing? How old is Elaine now? Did she clean her room? Ha, ha, ha." And so that became a book. I teach a class, by the way, in the experimental photo book for anybody who's interested in books. It's really where you can just let it all happen. And then, of course, proms. You're invited to. This was sort of like when we were coming out of that phase. Senior prom, and there's the senior prom picture. So you had some permission to take her picture during that period. And proms, oh my God. I'm so happy I'm not a commercial person taking prom pictures. I love this kind of thing, but the commercial stuff. There's my daughter working in Javas, and I finally had gained the permission to take her picture without her scowling at me. And a book about her first new car. So we went shopping for the first new car. There's that. Again, the whole series of things about that. I actually sent a copy of this book to the guy who sold her the car, and I can't tell you how he was so thrilled, because nobody ever did that. And you can do it, by the way. That book cost me $4 and maybe $2.75 postage. There's my daughter in a very pensive, and again, to get to the point where I can photograph somebody like that, who's that close to me, it took a long, long time. Starting with Patty, my wife, who's actually here. I will embarrass her by saying she came today. My favorite picture from our early life together, because it sort of captures something that's sort of deeply true about that person. But I live with her. She's in the house, and we're in the house, and so she's my subject. I am constantly able to take pictures. She's an editor, a writer, an editor, so she is with her computer a lot and with piles of stuff, because she does scholarly work for the most part, and so I've got a lot of pictures of her working or not working. amid all of her stuff, I put this in because one of her books was, she had an opening, like a signing at Barnes & Noble, so, but I'm, we're together a lot, and I always have my camera, and if she's driving, I can photograph. It sort of reminds me of the one of my mother in the supermarket. Mother and daughter. Mother trying to figure out whether she should spend money on something. Laundry. It's almost a religious picture. The dentist. Niagara Falls. We were reviewing these pictures, and Patty said, boy, my hair was a lot redder there than there. And time passes. Cats. If you want a cat, the best subject matter for photography in the world is a cat. Right? They're just so beautiful. And so there are a lot of pictures of cats. And a lot of pictures of sleeping. So I had been collecting these things, and I put them together into a little book that kind of grew called Patty Book. And every time I'd have a new set of pictures, I'd kind of expand Patty Book. And finally, this past August, we went to the Park Ave Festival, and we walked by this pedestal that's in the Lake Riley Park there. And it's like the pedestal. It looks like the pedestal for a statue, but there's no statue on it because it's just a pile of stones from the old Erie Canal. And I begged Patty to do this for me, and she did. She stood on the pedestal, and then I realized I now had the cover for the book. So that picture is hanging up in the faculty show up on the 3rd floor, along with the book, so you can look through the book and see all those pictures and more. But, if I had to say, obviously, my favorite book, that book, because it's of that person. But I have, at times, ventured beyond my safe space. I use that term humorously, but not so humorously because, you have to have permission. I had a long discussion with some of you when we went to Eastman House, and talking about what's in front of your eyes is what you photograph to start with. You don't have to go out and find something exotic in the world. What's in front of you is so interesting and you can learn how to do that. And so over the years, I've had other opportunities. For example, I went into the barber shop once, and I had my camera with me. It was a old Nikon camera, and I didn't want to leave it hanging, so I took it, and it was under the shroud. And my hair, Helen was the woman cutting my hair in the barber shop that I went to all the time. And I said, would you mind if I just photographed while you're cutting my hair? No, go right ahead. So I did. I took a bunch of pictures of my hair getting cut. And when I got home, I had a collection of photographs, and I said, I'll make a book. So I made a book called Haircut. And I took the book back, after a couple of weeks. This was part of a project called the Instant Book Project, and the goal was to make a book in a day, like photograph and make the book in a single day. And so this was one of those instant books. I took it back and I gave it to Helen, and the place just erupted. She was jumping up and down. Everybody was screaming, that's so great, that's so great. I had to get copies for everybody. And then Kim Tran, the owner of the salon, said, could you come back and take a picture? Could you take pictures for me in the salon, just that I could use and stuff like that? So I said, absolutely. So I have permission now to go into the salon. She got permission from all of her customers, and I was able to basically go and photograph to my heart's content. Kim got all dressed up for the day that I went there. She was wearing high heels. She's cutting hair in high heels. One of the most delightful people I know in my life. And so all of these haircut pictures and things like that. And these all sort of, again, got collected into a book called Hair and Us. The title was, Kim wanted that title. That's the title of her shop. She's a Vietnamese boat. She was on a boat picked up by the Norwegians, lived in Norway for 20 years, came to the United States. And and she said, the two things I love most in the world are hair and the U.S. And so she called her shop Hair and Us. And this became a book that was distributed when her lease was up in the shop that she was in, and she was looking for a new place and needed permission from the town of Brighton to move into this new this building that was not zoned for hair cutting. We went to the hearing and everything and gave copies of the book to the people who were on the zoning board. And I think I will claim that the book actually won the case for Kim, because they just couldn't, you can't deny. I've done other things like the ribbon cutting. There's Robach is there, and our Maley, our town supervisor. And so I've had just an incredible permission to photograph Kim. I use this technique again to photograph a dental exam. I asked permission. I had a camera, and I just photographed the dental hygienist and the dentist, who's been our dentist for 30-some years, and some selfies. Made a book called Dental Exam. I'm told, by the way, that this book would be illegal to make now because of HIPAA laws, because of the medical privacy laws, that you can't really photograph in a dental office. So I feel really, really good that I got away with that. And of course, with full permission, so trying to be legal. I should tell you a little story before I show you the next picture, and we're sort of in the home stretch here. I was sitting in my office one day, and somebody from another part of RIT came by and said, "Hey, guess what I got for Christmas or my birthday or something?" And I said, "What?" He said, "I got a GoPro camera." I said, "Oh, that's great. What are you going to do with it?" He says, "I don't know. Maybe I'll put it on my bike and take a ride and GoPro a bike ride." I said, "That is so boring. That is something everybody does. Nobody's going to want to watch it. Why would you want to do that?" So he goes, "Okay, wise guy. What would you do with it?" And I just off the top of my head said, "Well, I don't know, wear it to Wegmans." And he said, "Well, that's a dumb idea." But I went home that night and I said, "Hey, that's a good idea." So I strapped the camera. I strapped the camera on and I wore it to Wegmans, and I ended up with a whole shopping trip at Wegmans and some beautiful pictures of. And then I got this idea of just shopping for a month with a GoPro camera, and I did 12 shopping trips in a month, and I like Walgreens, the post office. All of these are. This is kind of like my tiki, right? That Miroslav tiki, like sneaking around. This is the closest I've ever come to being a snooping kind of person. Barnes and Noble. Men too, by the way, they are interesting sometimes. And so the bike shop, that's one of my favorite pictures, the computer guy at Best Buy. So I have a set of portraits of people that just happened to happen because I was taking pictures automatically with this camera. And that became Bricks and Mortar, which is 12 shopping trips. They come with soundtrack. You can listen to a soundtrack because they all have a recording attached to them. And then the last book I'll tell you about is our neighbor Dushanka, who's a Macedonian woman, and became sort of a part of a family and kind of sort of a surrogate grandmother. I always felt good because Dushanka had this kind of accent that was similar to my grandmother's, my father's mother's accent, and my kids never had that kind of old world connection. And so Dushanka one day said, "Would you take me to the store and because I need to buy some feta cheese for some kind of Macedonian holiday, and I need to bake a bunch of stuff for the holiday." And so we went to the Greek store, and again, I wore my GoPro camera. This is back during my GoPro days. And the Greek store is up on Culver, but the Greek store was closed. And so we're standing there. What are we going to do? Dushanka says, I know another place. So we went to this warehouse that's off Jefferson Road here, this giant restaurant warehouse supply company. She has a membership because her daughter has a haircutting salon or something, and she's got a business membership to this place. And we go in, and it's like this massive warehouse full of food and restaurant stuff. And she shows her card, and then we go. She says, come this way. And so we walked into this back refrigerated area, and we found the feta cheese. I mean, I grew up in a Greek family, and we had feta cheese, but I have never seen a 7-kilogram bucket of feta cheese. And there were like lots of these things. So she says, okay, let's get these buckets of cheese. And Euphrates brand feta cheese. And so we loaded up the car with the feta cheese. We bought 2 buckets of the stuff. And that became a book called Giant Buckets of Cheese. And I gave a copy to Dushanka, and that's like that is like her. That's like the book that she was in. She actually appeared in a book, and so it's going to become a family heirloom. So anyway, that's what I have to say to you guys is photograph the world around you. Go look at what's in front of you. Have that be your subject. And do that, and do that, and do that, and then eventually maybe you'll be out in the jungle somewhere following commandos or whatever, if that's what you want to do. But right now, this is what's in front of your eyes. And so anyway, thank you.